Right now, an unprecedented financial standoff is unfolding across the international border as billions of dollars in exported merchandise face a devastating 50% taxation. The current executive administration never anticipated the highly calculated diplomatic maneuvering recently executed by economic strategist Mark Carney, aiming to preserve their absolute sovereign leverage. Today on Verdict, we are providing a comprehensive geopolitical breakdown regarding the precise mechanisms driving this monumental clash over lucrative commercial relationships and continental supremacy. Historically, the United States maintained an incredibly cooperative commercial alliance with its northern neighbor, fostering mutual prosperity across numerous manufacturing sectors and massive agricultural networks. However, that vital bilateral relationship has experienced severe and relentless deterioration since the early months of last year due to aggressive new policy enforcement directives. President Donald Trump initiated this conflict by authorizing a comprehensive 25% penalty targeting a massive volume of critical materials imported from the north. Refusing to submit to these aggressive demands, the targeted nation immediately deployed a formidable reciprocal strategy designed to inflict equivalent financial damage upon American producers. Their leadership authorized $30 billion in retaliatory measures, which forcefully disrupted established supply channels and abruptly devastated profits for countless southern agricultural exporters worldwide. As a direct result of these punitive measures, the total volume of domestic wine shipments crossing the northern boundary collapsed by 80% almost overnight. The commercial devastation accelerated rapidly when subsequent penalties struck the deeply integrated automotive manufacturing sector, causing immediate operational paralysis across several massive regional assembly facilities. One prominent automotive corporation was forced to completely halt production at their sprawling Windsor location, creating catastrophic financial consequences for the surrounding local municipal economy. This sudden industrial suspension instantly stripped exactly 3,200 specialized manufacturing professionals of their employment, illustrating the profound localized destruction caused by disputes. That singular executive decision to pause operations generated massive financial shockwaves that destabilized the broader provincial economy and terrified corporate investors observing the worsening situation. Instead of seeking appeasement, foreign negotiators remained intensely resolute, publicly declaring their absolute confidence regarding their ultimate victory in this unprecedented and brutal economic confrontation. This initial exchange of punitive fiscal measures merely represented the opening chapter of a much larger and increasingly chaotic struggle over North American commercial dominance. Fast forwarding into the following year, the diplomatic pressure heavily intensified rather than cooling down, completely defying the optimistic predictions published by mainstream financial analysts. The American administration aggressively amplified their hostile rhetoric during the summer months, threatening a devastating 50% levy upon all merchandise crossing the northern border. This severe escalation specifically targeted materials previously protected under established continental treaties, threatening to completely obliterate decades of carefully negotiated and mutually beneficial commercial harmony. Implementing these catastrophic penalties would immediately compromise over $20 billion worth of imported materials, deliberately crippling the economic foundations of deeply integrated manufacturing sectors. The ensuing financial devastation would primarily fracture the industrial stability of major regions, including Ontario, British Columbia, and Quebec, jeopardizing countless regional businesses and livelihoods. Recognizing the existential threat posed by these aggressive policies, regional leaders organized an emergency summit located in Charlottetown to formulate a unified and forceful retaliation. Throughout this critical assembly, Ontario Premier Doug Ford fiercely advocated for implementing a severe maximum pressure campaign designed to maximize political pain within the capital. His aggressive proposal involved deliberately withholding crucial natural resources like potash and raw energy exports to forcefully compel Washington into abandoning their destructive tariff agenda. The chief negotiator representing the targeted nation maintained a highly calculated demeanor, officially confirming that every potential countermeasure remained actively under consideration during these proceedings. He eloquently described their national strategy as a simultaneous acceleration of diplomatic discussions paired with the meticulous preparation of devastating reciprocal economic punishments, if necessary. This dual-track methodology allowed them to project an image of cooperative engagement while quietly assembling the necessary leverage to inflict severe financial damage simultaneously. While American officials remained distracted by their own aggressive tariff announcements, this foreign strategist was secretly engineering a monumental geopolitical shift far beyond American borders. He initiated deeply confidential negotiations aimed at securing a massive alternative trade alliance directly with mainland China, intending to bypass American market dependence almost entirely. This stunning maneuver delivered an unmistakable message of defiance, clearly demonstrating that traditional intimidation tactics would no longer dictate the commercial policies of sovereign neighbors. The sheer audacity of exploring Asian partnerships during a continental trade war left American political commentators completely stunned and scrambling to understand the shifting dynamics. Upon discovering these clandestine negotiations with Beijing, the American executive branch erupted in absolute fury, perceiving the Asian pivot as an unforgivable betrayal of loyalty. The administration rapidly retaliated by publicly threatening to authorize an unprecedented 100% financial penalty unless the controversial alternative commercial framework was immediately abandoned. Furthermore, Donald Trump deliberately revoked a prestigious diplomatic invitation regarding his so-called Board of Peace, intentionally attempting to humiliate them upon the global stage. This rescinded invitation served as a blatant mechanism of political punishment, clearly designed to penalize any sovereign attempt to diversify economic portfolios away from Washington. Despite facing immense diplomatic hostility and overwhelming media pressure, the targeted chief negotiator completely refused to capitulate or publicly renounce his ongoing Asian commercial discussions. Instead, he masterfully maintained active communication channels with American representatives while simultaneously nurturing the highly lucrative Eastern alternatives to ensure maximum leverage during final negotiations. This remarkably disciplined methodology completely bewildered seasoned political operatives across the Capitol who were entirely accustomed to resolving disputes through aggressive bullying and public intimidation. The architect driving this defensive resistance utilized an extensive professional background managing prestigious central banks, completely eschewing the emotional volatility that plagues typical political campaigns. Having previously directed monetary policy for the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he approaches this confrontation as a strictly mathematical risk assessment. Rather than reacting impulsively to inflammatory executive announcements, this seasoned financial veteran methodically evaluated every single tariff threat through a lens of pure economic calculation. During a highly publicized January-winter conference gathering global financial elites, Mark Carney delivered an articulate presentation subtly dismantling the prevailing American economic warfare doctrines. Although he purposefully avoided mentioning specific political figures by name, every single international delegate attending the forum recognized the precise intended target of his criticism. This calculated restraint perfectly exemplifies his broader negotiating philosophy, relying upon undeniable economic realities rather than theatrical political outbursts to achieve complex long-term objectives. He rarely elevates his rhetorical volume during public appearances, yet every single strategic maneuver he executes carries immense consequential weight throughout global corporate financial markets. His stoic demeanor consistently provides a stark contrast against the chaotic unpredictability defining the opposing strategy, establishing profound credibility among nervous international investors seeking stability. Meanwhile, the barrage of punitive commercial threats originating from the capital fluctuated dramatically on a daily basis, plunging countless dependent enterprises into absolute operational chaos. The Ontario leader accurately summarized the disastrous situation, highlighting how the constant reversal of executive decisions cultivated an environment of paralyzing anxiety for border businesses. This chronic unpredictability effectively functions as an invisible tax, crippling the confidence of international entrepreneurs and severely delaying critical infrastructure investments across both massive nations. Every postponed corporate initiative directly translates into staggering monetary losses, widespread employment termination, and the total evaporation of crucial institutional trust necessary for economic expansion. The political leadership managing British Columbia openly emphasized that this suffocating atmosphere of uncertainty was already inflicting catastrophic financial damage upon countless local manufacturing communities. He emphatically stated that accelerating a permanent resolution to this destructive dispute remained absolutely essential for preserving the economic survival of everyone participating in commerce. Demonstrating profound regional solidarity, several provincial governments decisively ordered the immediate removal of all imported American spirits from their heavily regulated retail beverage distribution networks. This highly visible, symbolic protest perfectly illustrated the immense depth of public resentment rapidly accumulating against the unrelenting economic aggression directed outward from the capital. On July 21st, Mark Carney and Donald Trump participated in a pivotal telephone consultation addressing the rapidly approaching penalty deadlines looming over international trade. Both influential leaders mutually consented to significantly expedite their ongoing diplomatic discussions before the catastrophic 50% barrier could officially decimate continental supply chain networks. The Northern strategist cautiously characterized this dialogue as meaningful progress, while simultaneously reminding his counterparts that aggressive retaliatory options remained fully prepared for immediate deployment. This delicate equilibrium of demonstrating cooperative willingness while firmly projecting retaliatory capability has flawlessly defined his defensive architecture since the initial commencement of these hostilities. Unlike the sensationalized threats dominating political broadcasts, this experienced monetary expert conducts negotiations entirely behind closed doors, allowing undeniable statistical data to dominate the conversation. This sophisticated methodology provides a profound educational framework for institutional investors attempting to navigate the chaotic volatility generated by modern international economic warfare and protectionism. Ultimately, these aggressive commercial barriers rarely damage insulated political officials, instead inflicting severe financial devastation directly upon vulnerable working-class citizens and legitimate corporate enterprises. The dedicated assembly personnel stationed throughout Windsor experienced the brutal realities of this dispute long before mainstream journalists fully comprehended the underlying geopolitical motivations involved. Domestic agricultural producers, specialized dairy collectives, and prominent lumber harvesting conglomerates all suffered immediate financial trauma as long-standing international purchasing contracts were abruptly terminated. However, the reciprocal devastation proved equally severe across the southern boundary, where established exporters suddenly lost unfettered access to one of their most lucrative demographics. That staggering 80% contraction regarding beverage imports alone systematically obliterated the projected annual revenue streams relied upon by countless specialized wine vintners across California. When analysts multiply those specific catastrophic losses across the broader steel, aluminum, and dairy sectors, the cumulative economic destruction reaches truly unprecedented and terrifying proportions. Prominent financial historians currently classify this escalating confrontation as one of the most disastrous and financially exhausting international commercial conflicts documented within the modern era. Yet the most compelling narrative hidden beneath the alarming statistics involves the highly unconventional defensive posturing adopted by the targeted nation against overwhelming economic aggression. Their lead negotiator deliberately refused to mirror the inflammatory political grandstanding favored by his opponents, choosing instead to cultivate formidable countermeasures through silent diplomacy. He systematically constructed an impenetrable defensive architecture prioritizing global market diversification, unyielding patience, and the meticulous application of calculated reciprocal pressure against vulnerable southern industries. Securing that controversial Asian commercial partnership was never a random act of desperation, but rather a brilliantly engineered solution designed to eliminate historical economic subservience. For several consecutive decades, the northern economy directed roughly 75% of its total export volume exclusively into the massive consumer markets located southward. This profound structural reliance historically provided Washington with an almost insurmountable advantage whenever negotiating bilateral treaties, allowing them to dictate terms with absolute unyielding authority. Drawing upon an extensive career analyzing global markets, this brilliant central banker recognized this fundamental structural vulnerability with greater clarity than any preceding political administration. Therefore, rather than merely debating the minutiae of specific penalties, he completely revolutionized the foundational architecture governing the entire bilateral relationship to ensure eventual victory. By aggressively opening vast new international distribution channels, he instantly neutralized the primary mechanism of economic coercion previously utilized by his aggressive counterparts in Washington. Suddenly, the American administration discovered they were no longer bullying a desperate, isolated neighbor completely dependent upon securing immediate relief from overwhelming border taxation policies. They were instead confronting a fully emboldened sovereign entity possessing incredibly lucrative international alternatives, totally altering the established power dynamics defining continental diplomacy for generations. This monumental transition regarding geopolitical leverage completely shocked seasoned policy observers who had foolishly assumed the smaller economy would rapidly surrender under applied executive pressure. It was undeniably a remarkably subtle diplomatic maneuver, completely devoid of theatrical fanfare, yet it proved to be an exceptionally devastating strategic blow against protectionism. Institutional investors and sophisticated market analysts immediately recognized the profound implications of this shifting paradigm, adjusting their long-term forecasting models to reflect these realities. Every supplementary commercial agreement finalized with alternative international partners systematically erodes the coercive power generated by impending American taxation threats, shifting leverage further away constantly. This hidden realignment of global economic power represents the truly consequential narrative unfolding beneath the sensationalized media coverage, fixated upon daily political insults and intimidation. It provides a fascinating case study demonstrating exactly how disciplined, silent strategic execution can successfully outmaneuver overwhelmingly loud and aggressive public pressure campaigns over time. Recognizing this crucial distinction remains absolutely paramount for financial professionals because long-term market stability relies heavily upon actual structural leverage rather than political bluster. Currency valuations and corporate equities rarely respond permanently to theatrical rhetoric, but they violently adjust whenever fundamental changes alter the flow of international capital movement. Right now, the underlying distribution of continental economic influence is quietly transforming in profound ways that most casual observers have completely failed to adequately comprehend. This broadcast will meticulously deconstruct the impending consequences of this transformation, examining the exact economic mechanisms dictating the ultimate resolution of this historic border conflict. We will thoroughly investigate the terrifying statistical projections, the looming deadline implications, and the catastrophic financial fallout guaranteed if these critical diplomatic negotiations ultimately collapse. Continue watching this comprehensive analysis because understanding the upcoming economic turbulence will fundamentally alter your perspective regarding the stability of deeply interconnected global supply networks. We must now carefully evaluate the disastrous logistical nightmare awaiting major corporations if a sustainable resolution cannot be secured before the final executive deadline expires. The impending 50% penalty specifically targets crucial merchandise currently protected under the established North American Commercial Treaty, widely known as the complex USMCA framework. This foundational commercial architecture was specifically designed to ensure the perpetual flow of untaxed materials across borders, fostering unmatched industrial efficiency across the entire continent. Imposing a massive 50% barrier upon these designated materials would effectively annihilate the core principles sustaining that historic agreement, plunging markets into absolute turmoil. Prominent macroeconomic analysts project that the resulting financial shockwaves would aggressively ripple throughout deeply intertwined manufacturing ecosystems located on both sides of the international boundary. The production of modern vehicles requires thousands of specialized components that frequently cross the border multiple times before final assembly is completed at centralized facilities. Forcing each individual component to absorb a 50% taxation penalty during every transit creates a devastating compounding effect that mathematically destroys basic corporate profitability. Consequently, domestic consumers purchasing transportation vehicles will eventually absorb these staggering manufacturing cost increases, triggering massive inflationary pressures across the broader consumer retail economic sector. The recent operational paralysis experienced by prominent assembly corporations like Ford and General Motors proves these disastrous outcomes are not theoretical projections, but immediate realities. The tragic elimination of thousands of specialized manufacturing positions served as a terrifying preview regarding the immense collateral damage guaranteed by escalating this commercial confrontation. Numerous massive industrial conglomerates operating heavy production facilities face identical vulnerabilities, highlighting the extreme peril associated with aggressively disrupting carefully synchronized international logistical supply frameworks. This profound interconnectedness explains exactly why the defensive strategies deployed during this conflict remain absolutely vital for preserving the structural integrity of continental industrial dominance. The Northern leadership is not simply defending domestic employment statistics. They are actively fighting to preserve the operational viability of a massive, unified regional ecosystem. Punitive taxation policies of this immense magnitude possess no geographic loyalty, inflicting severe financial destruction equally upon any corporation participating within the targeted logistical pathways. Corporate executives managing massive American conglomerates have consistently acknowledged this undeniable reality during highly confidential lobbying sessions organized within the heavily guarded corridors of Washington. Powerful manufacturing consortiums representing domestic interests have repeatedly deployed extensive resources attempting to persuade aggressive political leaders against implementing these mutually destructive international trade barriers. These industrial advocates possess a profound understanding of a fundamental economic principle that emotionally driven political figures frequently ignore during their highly publicized television appearances. Deep structural integration guarantees that any aggressive financial penalty levied against a trading partner will inevitably generate an equal and devastating consequence for domestic operations. Meanwhile, the meticulously calculated retaliatory measures deployed by foreign leadership have already inflicted highly measurable and severe revenue destruction across numerous prominent American agricultural markets. That unprecedented collapse regarding beverage exportation volumes was definitely not a minor statistical anomaly, but rather a catastrophic event that permanently altered regional farming communities. Specialized agricultural collectives located along the western coast directly experienced this profound devastation through abruptly canceled distribution contracts and massive stockpiles of rapidly expiring inventory. Prominent manufacturers providing raw construction materials, specialized dairy products, and heavy industrial alloys across the American landscape have recently reported experiencing identical financial trauma simultaneously. This is precisely the critical perspective that mainstream media networks constantly fail to emphasize when delivering their sensationalized daily coverage regarding this escalating economic conflict. International taxation barriers never operate as isolated weapons. Every single penalty authorized by the administration instantly manifests a mirrored financial burden within their own economy. The brilliantly strategic monetary expert directing the defense thoroughly comprehended this inescapable dynamic, deliberately constructing his entire resistance movement around maximizing this specific reciprocal pressure. Rather than passively enduring the aggressive financial assaults, he ensured the attacking administration directly experienced undeniable economic pain, cascading throughout their most politically vulnerable constituencies. This approach represents the pinnacle of institutional central banking philosophy, which demands a thorough understanding of financial incentives before surgically applying pressure to modify behavior. He did not formulate this sophisticated defensive architecture through blind experimentation, but rather built it systematically using profound insights gained through decades of executive experience. This highly disciplined methodology stands in absolute contrast to the chaotic, headline-obsessed political theater that currently dominates modern international relations and aggressive trade diplomacy. Consequently, this relentless dedication to strict mathematical calculation perfectly explains exactly why this specific border dispute has unexpectedly prolonged into a grueling, multi-year marathon. The administration completely assumed their aggressive taxation announcements would immediately trigger total capitulation, severely underestimating the formidable resistance capabilities possessed by their highly educated adversaries. Refusing to crumble beneath overwhelming media scrutiny, the targeted leadership simply accelerated their efforts to secure international alternatives while maintaining professional dialogue with their attackers. Successfully securing that monumental Asian commercial framework perfectly illustrates the brilliant dual-track methodology that ultimately preserved their sovereign dignity during this unprecedented economic siege. The Northern government never permanently severed their historic relationship with Washington, but they decisively eliminated their catastrophic vulnerability by completely removing their absolute market dependence. This represents an incredibly nuanced, yet absolutely vital distinction regarding the psychological mechanics governing high-stakes international diplomacy and complex multi-billion-dollar corporate negotiations. Whenever one participant lacks viable external alternatives, the resulting conversation is fundamentally defined by coercion rather than genuine compromise, completely eliminating any possibility of fairness. Conversely, when both participating entities possess authentic secondary options, the entire negotiating paradigm suddenly transforms into a genuinely balanced interaction requiring mutual respect and concession. The brilliant monetary strategist deliberately engineered this essential equilibrium, forcing aggressive American policymakers into a highly uncomfortable period of chaotic recalibration and severe political adjustment. This profound shift in leverage perfectly contextualizes why that highly publicized midsummer telephone conversation carried vastly more significance than the superficial press releases initially suggested. When both prominent executives mutually agreed to significantly accelerate their diplomatic engagements, it represented a strategic pivot rather than an absolute victory for either administration. The American leadership finally recognized that aggressive public threats alone were completely failing to extract the sweeping policy concessions they had so confidently guaranteed earlier. Simultaneously, the defending strategist acknowledged that securing a cooperative regional framework remained highly preferable, provided his nation maintained absolute access to their newly secured alternatives. Maintaining this measured flexibility does not signal weakness, but rather demonstrates the exact sophisticated methodology required to successfully navigate prolonged periods of severe economic hostility. Concurrently, internal domestic politics required the chief negotiator to carefully manage intense pressure emanating from various provincial leaders, demanding drastically different approaches to the crisis. The aggressive faction vehemently demanded the immediate weaponization of critical energy exports, representing a highly confrontational ideology that threatened to completely derail all diplomatic progress. Other regional governors strongly advocated for prioritizing measured, methodical negotiations designed to de-escalate the soaring tensions and protect fragile corporate investments from further devastating disruption. The lead strategist was tasked with the monumental responsibility of balancing these intensely conflicting internal demands while projecting absolute unity toward a highly aggressive adversary. This challenge was incredibly complex, primarily because the distinct regional economies scattered across the northern landscape possess vastly different vulnerabilities regarding international border taxation policies. The centralized manufacturing corridor relies completely upon uninterrupted vehicular assembly, whereas Western provinces remain overwhelmingly dependent upon exporting massive quantities of extracted raw energy resources. Furthermore, coastal economies heavily invested in lumber harvesting face entirely different logistical challenges compared to regions dominated by specialized metallurgical processing and aluminum refining operations. Crafting an effective national defense required formulating a comprehensive strategy capable of simultaneously protecting all these diverse industrial sectors without prioritizing one over the other. This fundamental necessity perfectly explains why his overarching strategy prioritized establishing broad international leverage rather than deploying isolated, heavily concentrated retaliatory measures against the capital. Expanding commercial relationships across the globe inherently benefits every single province, completely regardless of the specific merchandise or raw materials they primarily manufacture and export. This sophisticated approach provides vastly superior long-term sustainability compared to engaging in an endless, destructive cycle of matching every single American penalty with retaliation. Engaging in perpetual reciprocal taxation inevitably inflicts severe financial suffering upon domestic populations as the retail prices of essential imported consumer goods artificially skyrocket uncontrollably. The former banking executive profoundly understood that aggressive protectionism guarantees widespread economic casualties across all participating demographics, permanently damaging the financial security of working families. Consequently, his disciplined restraint was never a manifestation of passivity, but rather a highly calculated defensive maneuver specifically designed to minimize unnecessary collateral economic destruction. One must sharply contrast this dignified composure against the relentless barrage of inflammatory political rhetoric continuously broadcasting from Washington throughout the duration of this conflict. The administration incessantly promoted these aggressive border policies as the ultimate defensive shield necessary for protecting vulnerable domestic industries and securing the national manufacturing workforce. However, the tragic closure of that sprawling Continental Assembly facility provided undeniable evidence proving that American laborers remained entirely unprotected from this escalating financial warfare. Highly synchronized logistical networks guarantee that whenever massive employment terminations occur within one jurisdiction, the resulting economic devastation immediately cascades across the border virtually undetected. This remains an incredibly uncomfortable reality that ambitious politicians deliberately conceal when delivering passionate speeches designed to manufacture public support for their destructive taxation agendas. Meanwhile, massive institutional investment firms have monitored this escalating geopolitical standoff with profoundly mounting trepidation as the unresolved status continually threatens their global portfolio stability. The mere existence of prolonged uncertainty actively generates severe financial consequences for corporate enterprises long before any official penalty is formally collected at border checkpoints. Regional political leaders accurately observed this phenomenon, definitively stating that the pervasive atmosphere of diplomatic instability was actively suffocating local commercial expansion and entrepreneurial confidence. Major corporations instinctively postpone critical infrastructure investments and expansion initiatives whenever they lack absolute clarity regarding the precise taxation frameworks governing their future international shipments. This chronic hesitation mathematically compounds over extended periods, severely depressing overall macroeconomic growth metrics and crippling industrial innovation throughout every corner of the entire continent. Professional financial analysts are therefore increasingly prioritizing the brilliant long-term defensive strategy deployed by the targeted nation, largely ignoring the sensationalized daily political threats. Every finalized treaty establishing access to alternative global markets permanently insulates their domestic economy from the coercive influence previously exerted exclusively by the American administration. This structural diversification represents the single most crucial metric requiring careful observation, vastly overshadowing the temporary volatility generated by unpredictable executive announcements regarding border penalties. While aggressive taxation policies frequently fluctuate based upon election cycles, thoroughly diversified international commercial alliances provide resilient economic foundations that typically endure for several generations. This remarkably sophisticated defensive strategy heavily relies upon specialized monetary expertise that Justin Trudeau and traditional politicians simply cannot replicate during international supply chain disruptions. Years spent directing immense central banking institutions provided this lead negotiator with an incredibly profound understanding regarding currency valuation mechanics and global capital flow behaviors. That exceptional technical proficiency dictates every solitary maneuver executed during these incredibly tense negotiations, providing absolute confidence to frightened corporate investors seeking stability amidst chaos. The global markets clearly recognize they are witnessing a masterful economic professional systematically dismantling a rudimentary political intimidation campaign using nothing but pure statistical logic. So exactly where does this unprecedented economic confrontation currently stand as the incredibly consequential final deadline for implementing these massive border penalties rapidly approaches today? Although diplomatic conversations have reportedly accelerated, the catastrophic 50% taxation threat remains entirely active, casting a massive shadow of impending doom over continental commerce. Absolutely nothing has been officially finalized, despite the overwhelmingly optimistic narratives deliberately circulated by both administrations following their highly publicized telephone consultation earlier this summer. Both rival factions constantly boast regarding alleged diplomatic progress, yet neither side has produced a definitive, legally binding treaty capable of permanently terminating these hostilities. This lingering ambiguity continuously inflicts massive operational friction upon countless diverse industries, struggling to accurately project their quarterly earnings amidst an incredibly volatile geopolitical landscape. Should these critical negotiations completely disintegrate, those devastating taxation measures will automatically activate, plunging the entire region into an era of unprecedented industrial economic hardship. The immediate implementation would instantly obliterate corporate profitability for international merchandise exporters, subsequently transferring those immense financial burdens directly onto the shoulders of average consumers. Conversely, any successful negotiated settlement requires a meticulously crafted compromise, allowing both political administrations to publicly declare victory while quietly abandoning their most extreme demands. This conflict conclusively demonstrates that cultivating sustainable global diversification provides vastly superior protection against foreign economic coercion than engaging in loud, destructive public shouting matches. Moving forward, financial observers must closely monitor currency valuation trends, corporate lobbying efforts, and the potential expansion of newly established Asian commercial partnerships for clues. These specific underlying indicators will accurately predict the final resolution of this historic dispute far better than any sensationalized headline broadcast by mainstream media networks. We will continue monitoring every single development regarding this monumental clash over international trade supremacy as new details inevitably emerge during the upcoming critical weeks. Subscribe to Verdict today so you never miss our comprehensive geopolitical breakdowns analyzing the massive global forces actively reshaping your financial future and continental stability. Please leave a comment below explaining exactly how you believe this unprecedented international economic standoff will ultimately resolve itself before the final deadline officially expires.